Pick a card, any card, or pick a problem, any problem. There is no trick to defining a problem if you know what to do. Just like when you know how this trick works, it's simple. But you don't have to be a magician to successfully solve problems. Hello, I'm Roger Firestien, and with me is Suzanne Chamberlin. And today we're going to talk about the importance of clarifying problems so that you can solve them.
A clear definition of the problem is essential if you want to generate ideas that really work. For example, Albert Einstein was once asked if some imminent disaster threatened the world and he had 1 hour in which he knew he could save it, how would he spend his time?
Dr. Einstein thought for a moment and replied, I would spend the first 55 minutes identifying the problem and the last 5 minutes solving it. For the formulation of a problem is often far more essential than its solution, which may be merely a matter of mathematical or experimental skill.
Now, most of us aren't Einsteins or Firesteins, but when we consciously seek to redefine problems, we can dramatically increase our effectiveness. For example, in the 1950s, experts believed that the ocean-going freighter industry was dying. Costs were rising, and it took longer and longer to get merchandise delivered. This increased pilferage at the docks as goods piled up waiting to be loaded. The shipping industry stated their challenge as, in what ways might we make ships more economical at sea and while in transit from one port to another? They built ships that were faster or required less fuel and reduced crew size. Costs still kept going up, but the industry kept concentrating its efforts on reducing the specific costs related to ships while at sea and doing work. A ship is capital equipment, and the biggest cost for capital equipment is the cost of not working. Finally, by looking at the challenge from all possible angles, a consultant stretched the industry's challenge to, in what ways might the shipping industry reduce costs? This allowed them to consider all aspects of shipping, including loading and stowing. The breakthrough that saved on industry was to separate loading from stowing by doing the loading on land before the ship is in port. It's much quicker to put on and take off preloaded freight. They decided to concentrate on the costs of not working rather than working, and reduce the amount of time a freighter does not work. The answer was the roll-on, roll-off ship and the container ship.
This breakthrough was the direct result of reframing the challenge. The results have been startling. Freighter traffic has increased 5-fold in the last 30 years and costs are down by 60%. Port time has been reduced by 3/4 and with it congestion and theft. The breakthrough that saved the industry from ruin was not more ideas, but it was a much better definition of the real problem. It wasn't until the initial definition of the problem was challenged that the breakthrough occurred. So how do we get better at defining problems so that we can solve them? There are 4 things to consider: the language you use to define a problem, changing your perspective of the problem, using some helpful phrases to formulate problem statements, and generating many restatements of the problem.
First, the language we use to describe a situation can make the difference between viewing the challenge as a problem that can be solved or as an insurmountable obstacle. There's a big difference between saying, we don't have any money for this project, compared to, how might we raise the money? Or, how might we reduce the cost of this venture? The first phrase will block your thinking, but the last 2 statements encourage you to come up with ideas for solving the problem.
Remember our shipping industry example? Defining the problem in a way that could be solved wasn't enough. It was also necessary to change the perspective of the problem. You can consciously change your perspective on the problems that confront you as well. For example, you can change your perspective of the problem by assuming the point of view of another person or group. How would your customer define this problem? How would your competition? How would a 6-year-old child define your challenge? Change your view of the problem. How would your challenge look if you were riding in the space shuttle or in a submarine on the bottom of the ocean? You can also challenge your initial definition of the problem by asking, why is this a problem? Or what is stopping me from solving this problem?
Once you've phrased your problem so that it can be solved and looked at from a variety of perspectives, here are some helpful phrases to formulate problem statements. You might recall that there are 4 important ingredients for concocting problem statements that assist us instead of hinder us. They are a statement starter, an owner, a verb, and an object. For example, Here's a good problem statement. How might I generate funding for my video project? A statement starter is the clue to your brain that you're dealing with a problem that can be solved instead of an insurmountable obstacle. Statement starters begin with the words how to, how might, or in what ways might. Following the statement starter is an owner. That's the person or group who's responsible for implementing the outcome of the creative problem-solving session. In our example above, I own the problem. Next, the verb generate. And finally, the object. In this case, it's funding for my video project. Voila! Like magic. A problem statement that will help me get some ideas instead of just blocking my thinking.
But coming up with one statement of the problem isn't enough. How do you increase your chances of finding that statement of the problem that will open the pathway to valuable ideas? Just as it is useful to generate lots of ideas for solving a problem, it's helpful to generate lots of restatements of the problem so that then you can select the best definition of the problem on which to generate ideas. To do that, just apply the divergent thinking guidelines. Defer judgment, strive for quantity, seek wild ideas, build on ideas. Set a quota of at least 25 problem statements and go for it. You'll be pleasantly surprised at the variety of ways you'll be able to challenge your assumptions of what you thought the problem was. Stick-em-up brainstorming works especially well for generating lots of problem statements. Remember to really stretch your interpretation of the problem. Look at the problem from lots of different viewpoints and generate problem statements by looking at the data that you have on that situation.
Now that you have a freighter full of ways to restate your problem, how do you pick the best from the rest? Well, once again, follow some guidelines and use the highlighting technique that we covered in depth in one of our other videos. Remember the highlighting technique's designed to help you select the best restatement of your problem. To get those great problem statements, first look through your list and mark the hits. These are the problem statements that stand head and shoulders above the rest, that intrigue you, or that provide a new insight into the problem. Be sure to mark your hits first. After you mark your hits, review them and see if they're related.
Did you say mark the hits first?
That's right. Mark the hits first. Once you've marked the hits, group the hits that relate to each other into clusters. The clusters represent options that fit together, or overlap, or somehow relate to each other in a meaningful way. Don't try to force problem statements into a cluster. It is okay for some problem statements to stand on their own. Once you've clustered your problem statements, then ask yourself, what does this cluster represent to me? Restate what the cluster represents in the form of another problem statement.
Finally, review the problem statements and select the one that you want to work on first, that would benefit from getting a lot of ideas for solving. Remember, once you've generated ideas for one problem statement, you can always go back and generate ideas for others. But many times, as a result of generating ideas for one problem statement, you will make some dramatic progress on the other aspects of your challenge.
Now that you know how to generate problem statements, you don't have to be afraid of the problems that come your way. Why, you might even go out and look for some problems that you can solve and make them disappear like magic.
Hey, what happened? Hey, who turned off the lights? Suzanne? Jonathan? Anybody? Help!